The Rougarou, or the Loup Garou, is a folklore that has its roots in French culture. I first heard of the Rougarou when I took my first trip up to Canada. It was my first time in Canada. Even though I live in the state of New York most of my life, I was an hour away from the Canadian border. I took along my girlfriend. Our first stop was the Canadian side of the Niagara Falls. I've seen the American side of the falls before. I've always heard that the Canadian side was always prettier, so we spend the afternoon looking at the falls. Our next stop for later that evening was going to Toronto and checking in to a hotel. We follow that plan, and everything goes smoothly for the rest of the day. The plan was to enter Canada through Niagara Falls, go to Toronto, see the countryside, and then head over to Montreal. It's our second day in Canada. It's the late afternoon, and we decide to head over to Montreal. We take the long way, the more scenic route. We're driving through the countryside. When it starts to rain, we enter a small town called Montreal. Everyone there spoke French. Everyone seemed to speak English as well. We go into this older-looking pub. It's dark in there, even though the windows aren't covered. We sit down and look at a small menu on the table. As we sit there, talking for a couple minutes, we hear a voice behind us. Qu'est-ce que c'est, Americans? Oi. He invites us over, and I agree. Over the course of 2 hours, we talk about many things. He talks about his time in the Canadian Special Ops, the certain types of beer he likes to drink, how he assassinated for the Queen. And then we get to a topic which he refers to as the Loup Garou. He said back in 2004 he was out hunting in the central part of Manitoba. He was on a 3-week hunting trip with one of his hunting buddies. One evening, they were hunting rabbit. They don't have tree stands in this area, so they climb the trees and sit on the limbs. When one shoots a rabbit, the other one has to climb down and get it. They were sitting up there for some time before they finally saw one. He brings his rifle up and takes a shot. He misses. He said he didn't mind so much. He already shot one earlier and had 2 back at the cabin. About 5 minutes after this occurred, they hear someone walking straight towards them. In front of them is a walking path that's pretty wide enough for 2 people. And then on the other side of that are thick woods. That's where they hear this thing coming from. Whatever it was something big, at least the size of a person. But there were no people out here. It had to be 2 things, either a bear or a moose. He was hoping for a moose. Throughout the night, he seemed to have a personal vendetta against moose. They remained silent, waiting for the moose to come into view. They hear the footsteps get right to the edge of the forest, right in front of the path. They get ready and see nothing. They hear nothing. The footsteps have stopped, but they know it has to be within 30 feet of them. He tries to look for the outline of antlers. He spots the head of the moose, kind of bobbing back and forth slowly. He waits for the moose to step into the light to get a better shot. That's when he realizes he doesn't see any antlers. He hears this thing sniffing, and then makes a low growl. It walks out of the forest and steps into the light. He thought it was a bear at first, but then he notices the legs look like the legs of a coyote, and he could see a snout. This thing stands in the pathway, sniffing the air. It was kind of hunched over. Each digit on the paw was elongated, and it looked more like hands than paws. He could see long claws. This thing was pretty tall. It was hard to gauge the height. They were about 20 to 25 feet above the ground. If it were to tilt its head up just slightly, it would see them in the tree. It turns to its right, as if it's getting ready to walk down the path. At that moment, his friend loses his grip on his rifle and quickly grabs it, breaking the silence. They look down. This thing is staring right at him. He goes to brace himself with his left hand against the tree. As he does this, his right hand accidentally sets off the rifle. His friend takes a shot as well. At this point, he thought he had no choice other than to shoot back at it. They continue to shoot until this thing runs off on two legs and lets out a kind of high-pitched scream. It didn't sound like it looked. It looked more like it would have a lower bass howl to it, maybe like a bear or a lion. He remembers seeing the tail as it was running away. He didn't see where this thing went off to. They wait in the tree for about a half an hour before climbing down and going back to their cabin. That was the only time he ever saw it, but he'd seen tracks that he couldn't explain, and heard howls during the night that sound like a bear and a bobcat combined. Since that night, he's been trying to find that animal again, but hasn't had any luck.